Penta's tiny heart-shaped face went grim, her nostrils flaring. From one of my own? Vast anger. If one of Ademre were to give me a disease, I would be furious. I would shout from the top of a cliff what they had done. I would make their life as painful as a broken bone. She gestured disgust, brushing at the front of her shirt in the first piece of Adem hand talk I had ever learned from Tempe. Then I would make the long trek over the mountains into the Tal to be cured of it, even if the trip should take 2 years and bring no money to the school, and none would think the less of me for that. I nodded to myself. It made sense. Given their attitudes about sex, if it were any other way, disease would run rampant through the population. I saw Penta looking at me expectantly. Thank you for the flowers, I said. She nodded and stepped closer, looking up at me. Her eyes were excited as she smiled her shy smile. Then, her face grew serious. Is it enough to satisfy your barbarian rituals? Or is there more that must be done? I reached down and ran my hand along the smooth skin of her neck, sliding my fingertips under the long braids so they brushed the back of her neck. She closed her eyes and tipped her face up toward mine. They are lovely, and more than enough, I said, and bent to kiss her. I was right, Penta said with a contented sigh as we lay naked among the flowers. You have a fine anger. I lay on my back, her small body curled under my arm, her heart-shaped face resting gently on my chest. What do you mean by that? I asked. I think anger might be the wrong word. I mean Vavin, she said, using the Ademic term.
I got vertical clearance.
Is that the same? I don't know that word, I admitted. I think anger is the right word, she said. I have spoken with Bashet in your language, and she did not correct me.
Sketchy. I don't know if we're gonna get it.
What do you mean by anger, then? I asked. I certainly don't feel angry. Penta lifted her head from my chest and gave me a lazy, satisfied smile. Of course not, she said. I have taken your anger. How could you feel such a way? Are you angry, then? I asked, sure I was missing the point entirely. Penta laughed and shook her head. She had undone her long braid, and her honey-colored hair hung down the side of her face. It made her look like an entirely different person. That and the lack of the mercenary reds, I suppose. It is not that kind of anger. I am glad to have it. I still do not understand, I said. This could be something barbarians do not know. Explain it to me as if I were a child. She looked at me for a moment, her eyes serious. Then she rolled over onto her stomach so she could face me more easily. This anger is not a feeling. It is... She hesitated, frowning prettily. It is a desire.
I didn't know there was a team
It is a making. It is a wanting of life. Penta looked around, then focused on the grass around us. Anger is what makes the grass press up through the ground to reach the sun, she said. All things that live have anger. It is the fire in them that makes them want to move and grow and do and make. She cocked her head. Does that make sense to you? I think so, I said. And women take the anger from men in sex. She smiled, nodding. That is why afterward a man is so weary. He gives a piece of himself. He collapses. He sleeps. She glanced down. Or a part of him sleeps. Not for long, I said. That is because you have a fine, strong anger, she said proudly. As I have already said, I can tell because I have taken a piece of it. I can tell there is more waiting. There is, I admitted. But what do women do with the anger? We use it, Penta said simply. That is why, afterward, a woman does not always sleep as a man does. She feels more awake, full of the need to move, often full of desire for more of what brought her the anger in the first place. She lowered her head to my chest and bit me playfully, wriggling her naked body against me. It was pleasantly
We
distracting.
need to watch her back.
Does this mean women have no anger of their own? She laughed again.
I'm down to go.
No, all things have
Yeah,
anger,
There's Cyril.
but women have many uses for their anger, and men have more anger than they can use, too much for their own good. How can one have too much of the desire to live and grow and make? I asked.
There's no way that we
It
just got all this
seems
loot.
more would be better. Pentha shook her head, brushing her hair back with one hand. No, it is like food. One meal is good. 2 meals is not better. She frowned again.
G2's also dead.
No, it
And we have
is
good
more
spot.
like
We just need
wine.
somebody watching our back
1
at all
cup of
times.
wine is good. 2 is sometimes better,
does
but
rat go?
10? She nodded seriously. That is very much like anger.
Well,
A man
not the
who
rat,
grows
but the
full of
duo, I
it.
guess.
It is
he
like a
in here?
poison in him. He wants too many things. He wants all things. He becomes strange and wrong in his head. Violent. She nodded to herself. Yes, that is why anger is the right word, I think. You can tell a man who has been keeping all his anger to himself. It goes sour in him.
Jesus,
It turns
that guy
against
watches
itself
anger.
and drives him to breaking rather than making. I can think of men like that, I
There's
said,
another,
but I can
thing
think
here.
of women too. All things have anger, she repeated with a
What
shrug.
even like happened to
A
them?
stone does not have much compared to a budding tree. It is the same with people.
3, 6,
Some
7,
have more,
8, 9,
or
10,
less. Some use it wisely.
11.
Some do not.
Oh yeah.
She gave me a
14
wide
side.
smile. I have a great deal, which is why I am so fond of sex and fierce in
You're
my
above
fighting.
us.
She bit at my chest again, less playfully this time,
Just keep
and
watching
began
that.
to work
I'm
her way
telling you,
up
I'm
to
just
my
gonna watch
neck.
this.
Minus, you good? You can see this?
But if you take the anger from a man in sex, I said, struggling to concentrate,
What was going on over here?
doesn't that
There's a
mean
team
the
like
more
in
sex
Pablo
you
Escobar,
have, the more you want?
Thing right here.
It is like the water one uses to prime a
I can, like-
pump, she said hotly against my ear. Come now. I will have all of it, even if it takes us all day and half the night. We eventually moved from the grassy field to the baths, and then to Pentha's house of 2 snug rooms built against the side of a bluff. The moon was in the sky and had been watching us for some time through the window,
There's another box right here,
though
by the way.
I doubt we showed her anything she hadn't seen before.
Pull for that pack. There's a pack dropping right
Is that enough for you? I said breathlessly.
now. It's dropping in.
We were side by side in her pleasantly capacious bed, the sweat drying off our bodies. If you take much more of it, I might not have enough anger left to speak or breathe.
There's something gold on it.
My hand lay on the flat plane of her belly.
There's another
Her
level, by the
skin
way,
was
so if someone
soft
wants
and
to-
smooth, but when she laughed,
actually
I could
wants
feel
that,
the
then-
muscles of her stomach jump, going hard as sheets of steel.
That's just nuts, but... Yeah.
It is enough for now, she said, exhaustion plain in her voice. It would upset Vachette if I left you empty as a fruit with all the juice pressed out.
That shit.
Despite my long day, I was oddly wakeful, my thoughts bright and clear. I remembered something she had said earlier.
No.
You mentioned that a woman has many uses for her anger.
You guys walking up?
What use does a woman have for it that a man does not?
There's people over here.
We teach, she said. We give names. We track the days and tend to the smooth turning of things. We plant.
Well,
We make babies.
teams are contesting,
She shrugged.
5 teams
Many
died
things.
in here.
A man can do those things as well, I said. Pentha chuckled. You have the wrong
Are they
word,
up the price?
she said, rubbing at my chin. A beard is what a man makes.
There's no
A
duo.
baby is something different, and that you have no part of.
Oh, $400 more.
We don't carry the baby, I said, slightly offended. But still, we play our part in making it.
I'm here.
Pentha turned to look at me, smiling as if I had made a joke. Then her smile faded.
Sides too, kinda.
She propped herself up on her elbow and looked at me for another
I don't think we
long
should let them
moment.
in.
Are you in serious? Seeing
Yeah.
my perplexed expression, her eyes grew wide with amazement, and she sat upright on the bed. It is true, she said. You believe in man-mothers. She giggled, covering the bottom half of her face with both hands. I never believed it was true. She lowered her left hand, revealing an excited grin as she gestured, amazed delight. I felt I should be irritated, but I couldn't quite muster the energy. Perhaps some of what she said about men giving away their anger had some truth to it. What is a man-mother? I asked. Are you not making a joke? She asked, one hand still half covering her smile. Do you truly believe a man puts a baby in a woman? Well, yes, I said a little awkwardly. In a manner of speaking, it takes a man and a woman to make a baby, a mother and a father. You have a word for it, she said, delighted. They told me this too, with the stories of dirt soup, but I never thought it the real story. I sat up myself at this point, growing concerned. You do know how babies are made, don't you? I asked, gesturing serious earnestness. What we have been doing for most of the day is what makes a baby. She looked at me for a moment in stunned silence, then dissolved helplessly into laughter, trying to speak several times, only to have it overwhelm her again when she looked up at the expression on my face. Pentha put her hands on her belly, prodding it as if puzzled. Where is my baby? She looked down at her flat belly. Perhaps I have been sexing wrong these years. When she laughed, the muscles across her stomach flickered, making a pattern like a turtle shell. I should have 100 babies if what you say is true. 500 babies.
They have to.
It does not happen every time there is sex, I said. There are only certain times when a woman is ripe for a baby. And have you done this? She asked, looking at me with mock seriousness, while a smile tugged at her mouth. Have you made a baby with a woman? I have been careful not to do such a thing, I said. There is an herb called Sophium. I chew it every day, and it keeps me from putting a baby in a woman. Pentha shook her head. This is more of your barbarian sex rituals, she said. Does bringing a man to the flowers also make a baby where you come from? I decided to take a different tack. If men do not help with making babies, how do you explain that babies look like their fathers? Babies look like angry old men, Pentha said, all bald and with... She hesitated, touching her cheek. With face lines. Perhaps the old men are the only ones making babies then. She smirked. What about kittens? I asked. You have seen a litter of kittens. When a white cat and a black cat have sex, you get kittens both white and black, and kittens of both colors. Always? She asked. Not always, I admitted, but most times. But if there is a yellow kitten? She asked. Before I could put together an answer, she waved the question away. Kittens have little to do with this, she said. We are not like animals. We do not go into season. We do not lay eggs. We do not make cocoons or fruit or seeds. We are not dogs or frogs or trees. Pentha gave me a serious look. You are committing a false thinking. You could as easily say 2 stones make baby stones by banging against each other until a piece breaks off. Therefore, 2 people make baby peoples in the same way. I fumed, but she was right. I was committing a fallacy of analogy. It was faulty logic. Our conversation continued along this vein for some time. I asked her if she had ever known a woman to get pregnant who had not had sex in the previous months. She said she didn't know of any woman who would willingly go 3 months without sex, except those who were traveling among the barbarians, or very ill, or very old. Eventually, Pentha waved a hand to stop me, gesturing exasperation. Do you hear your own excuses? Sex makes babies, but not always. Babies look like man-mothers, but not always. The sex must be at the right time, but not always. There are plants that make it more likely or less likely. She shook her head. You must realize what you say is thin as a net. You keep sewing new threads hoping it will hold water, but hoping does not make it true. Seeing me frown, she took my hand and gestured comfort into it as she had before in the dining hall, all the laughter gone out of her face. I can see you think this truly. I can understand why barbarian men would want to believe it. It must be comforting to think you are important in this way. But it is simply not. Penta looked at me with something close to pity. Sometimes a woman ripens. It is a natural thing, and men have no part in it. That is why more women ripen in the fall, like fruit. That is why more women ripen here in Hert, where it is better to have a child. I tried to think of some other convincing argument, but none would come to mind. It was frustrating. Seeing my expression, Penta squeezed my hand and gestured concession. Perhaps it is different for barbarian women, she said. You are only saying that to make me feel better, I said sullenly, and was overcome with a jaw-popping yawn. I am, she admitted. Then she gave me a gentle kiss and pushed at my shoulders, encouraging me to lie back down on the bed. I did, and she nestled into the crook of my arm again, resting her head on my shoulder. It must be hard to be a man, she said softly. A woman knows she is part of the world. We are full of life. A woman is the flower and the fruit. We move through time as part of our children, but a man? She turned her head and looked up at me with gentle pity in her eyes.
Thanks so much for the prime. Dude, we're fucking
You are an empty branch. You know when you die, you will leave nothing of any import behind. Penta stroked my chest fondly. I think that is why you are so full of anger. Maybe you do not have more than women. Maybe the anger in you simply has no place to go. Maybe it is desperate to leave some mark. It hammers at the world. It drives you to rash action, to bickering, to rage. You paint and build and fight and tell stories that are bigger than the truth. She gave a contented sigh and rested her head on my shoulder, snuggling herself firmly into the circle of my arm. I am sorry to tell you this thing. You are a good man and a pretty thing, but still, you are only a man. All you have to offer the world is your anger. Chapter 128. Names. It was the day that I would either stay or leave. I sat with Vashette on a green hill, watching the sun rise out of the clouds to the east. Seisra means to fly, to catch, to break, Vashette said softly, repeating herself for the 100th time. You must remember all the hands that have held her. Many hands, all following the litany. You must never use her in an improper way. I promise, I said for the 100th time, then hesitated before bringing up something that had been bothering me. But, Vashette, you used your sword to trim the willow branch you beat me with. I saw you use it to hold your window open once. You pare your nails with it. Vashette gave me a blank look. Yes. Isn't that improper? I asked. She cocked her head, then laughed. You mean I should only use it for fighting? I gestured, obvious implication. A sword is sharp, she said. It is a tool. I carry it constantly. How is using it improper? It seems disrespectful, I clarified. You respect the thing by putting it to good use. It may be years before I return to the barbarian lands and fight. How does it harm my sword if it cuts kindling and carrots in the meantime?
Get a new one.
Vachette's eyes grew serious. To carry a sword your whole life, knowing it was only for killing. She shook her head. What would that do to a person's mind? It would be a horrible thing.
Or you could just charge your mouse. There's that.
Vachette had returned to Hert last night, dismayed that she had missed my stone trial.
What's the plan?
She said I was right to lay aside my sword when Carceret did, and that I had made her proud. Yesterday, Cheyenne had formally invited me to stay and train at the school. In theory, I already earned that right, but everyone knew that was more of a political fiction than anything. Her offer was a flattering one, an opportunity I knew I would likely never have again. We watched a boy herd a flock of goats down the side of a hill. Vachette, is it true that the Adem have no concept of fatherhood? Vachette nodded easily, then paused. Tell me you did not embarrass both of us by talking about this with
Yeah, but then you
everyone
could-
while
then
I
you're
was
just making it
gone.
up. Then they
She
just
said
know
with a
they
sigh.
can take it. Also,
Only with Penta, I said.
Yes, yeah, that's true.
She thought it was the funniest thing she had
at that
heard in
point, it's
10
just
months'
theirs whenever they
time.
want it, not ours whenever
It
we want
is fairly amusing at that,
Hetty's-
Bashat said, her mouth curving a little.
On my hair.
It's true then? Even you believe this? You... Bashat held up a hand and I trailed off. Peace, she said. Think whatever you wish about your man-mothers. It is all the same to me. She gave a soft smile of remembrance. My poet king actually believed the woman was
Not gonna
nothing
lie.
more than the ground in which a man might plant a baby. Bashat made an amused huffing sound
Where?
that wasn't quite a laugh. He was so sure he was
gotta
right.
go all the way down.
Nothing could sway him. Years ago I decided
you were
arguing such
scrolling
things with a
the actual
barbarian is a
car. It's really
long,
a
weary
microphone
waste of
hour.
my time.
Power of the purple mag.
She shrugged.
The actual vehicle.
Think what you want about making babies. Believe in demons. Pray to a goat. So long as it doesn't bruise me, why should I bother myself?
Dude, I don't have a light mag, dude.
I chewed it over for a moment.
You don't have light mag, dude?
There's a white
There's
one
wisdom
I
in
got,
that,
but
I said. She nodded. But either a man helps with a
I need to
baby
look the light
or
on.
he does not, I pointed out.
Oh, I found a
There can be many opinions on a thing, but there is only one truth.
Fucking tree?
Bashat smiled lazily. And if the
No, but mine
pursuit
looks
of
pretty
truth
bad.
was my goal, that would concern me.
I mean, mine is
She gave a long yawn, stretching like a happy cat.
I need
Instead, I will
an
focus on the
optic.
joy in
I
my
need
heart,
more
the
ammo,
prosperity
some
of the
double
school,
white,
and understanding the litany.
213.
If I have time left after that, I will put it toward worrying on the truth. We watched the sunrise for a while longer in silence. It occurred to me Vashat was quite a different person when she wasn't struggling to cram the Catan and all of Ademic into my head as quickly as possible. That said, Vashat added, if you persist in clinging to your barbarian beliefs about man-mothers, you would do well to keep quiet about it. Amusement is the best you can hope for. Most will simply assume you an idiot for thinking such things. I nodded. After a long moment, I decided to finally ask the question I had been holding off for days.
Yes. Right side is. I don't know about
Magwin called me Maedra. What does it mean?
the Jurassic
It is your name, she said.
ammo.
Speak of it to no
I don't
one.
have a room to pick up ammo.
It is a secret thing? I asked. She nodded. It is a thing for you and your teachers and Magwin. It would be dangerous to let others know what it is.
I mean, the houses is definitely like a solid force. That
How could it be dangerous?
really enough that we can get it.
Bashat looked at me as if I were
So it should
daft.
be like a spawn box. I'd probably
When you know a name, you have power over it. Surely you know
In the
this.
middle.
shit, yeah,
But
it
I
might-
know your name, and Cheyenne's,
It might be
and
worth
Tempe's.
doing if you.
What danger is in that?
$10, but
She waved a hand. Not those names.
spawn.
Deep names. Tempe is not the name he was given by Magwin, just as Quoth is
yeah, it
not
does have
yours.
armor.
Deep
for you.
names have meanings.
Oh my god.
I already knew what Bashet's name meant.
We just did like the nay in my face.
What does Tempe mean? Tempe means little iron. Tampa means iron, and it means to strike iron,
We're getting
and it
railed
means
right now,
angry.
Tyler.
Cheyenne gave him that name years ago. He was a most troublesome student.
I don't know, I feel like we're
In Aturan, temper means angry.
I think.
I pointed it out rather excitedly, amazed at the coincidence. And it is also something you do with iron when forging it into steel.
We finished.
Bashat shrugged, unimpressed.
We did finish them.
That is the way of names. Tempe is a small name, and still it holds much. That is why you should not speak of yours even to me. But
gonna go from
I do
right
not
here
know
to
your
like
language well enough to
somebody
tell
might
what it
shoot us in the
means
back.
myself, I protested.
I'll go for these buildings.
A man should know the meaning of his own name.
Look and see if we can get info on it.
Bashat hesitated, then relented.
And these buildings are a checkpoint, and we
There's
It
somebody
means
there.
flame and thunder and
Nobody
broken
on top of
tree.
that rock. We could also land on top of
I
that
thought
rock.
for a while, and decided I liked it.
Want the buildings for now.
When Magwin gave it to me, you seemed surprised.
Make sure we have.
Why is that?
And then if you want to scout.
Okay.
It is not proper for me to comment on another's name. Absolute refusal. Her gesture was so sharp, it almost hurt to look at.
Dude, nobody
She
looted
came
mill.
to her feet, then brushed her hands against her pants.
Got a purple light, or
Come.
purple light mag.
It is time you gave your answer to Cheyenne.
The other side would be better.
Cheyenne motioned for us to sit as we entered her room. Then she took a seat herself, startling me by showing the smallest of smiles. It was a terribly flattering gesture of familiarity. "Have you decided?" she asked. I nodded. "I thank you,
Am I
Cheyenne.
crazy for saying
But
that
I cannot
Prowlers might
stay.
be better?
I must return to Severin to speak with the mayor. Tempe fulfilled his obligation when the road was made safe, but I am bound to return and explain everything that happened." I thought of Denna as well, but didn't mention her. Cheyenne gestured an elegant mingling of approval and regret. "Fulfilling one's duty is of the Lethani." She gave me a serious look. "Remember, you have a sword and a name, but you must not hire yourself out as if you had taken the red." "Vashet has explained everything to me," I said, reassurance. "I will make arrangements for my sword to be returned to Hert if I am killed. I will not teach the K-10 or wear the red." Carefully attentive curiosity. "But I am permitted to tell others I have studied fighting with you." Reserved agreement. "You may say you have studied with us, but not that you are one of us." "Of course," I said,
If we go Prowlers
"and not that
close
I'm
out to
equal
the
to you."
back, we can go through the cave.
Cheyenne
and nobody can
gestured,
really hold us.
content
If
satisfaction.
we go Prowlers and
Then
pull
her
us
hands
here, we
shifted,
control
and she
this
made a
outside
small
the building.
gesture of
And
embarrassed
with this
admission.
rock,
"This is not entirely a gift,"
driving.
she said.
If we do
"You will
Prowlers,
be a better
or
fighter
we
than
hit
many
Prowlers, we control
barbarians.
this side, like the
If you
rooftop.
fight and
Like,
win,
I full
the
LOS,
barbarians
I think they're
will
back there
think,
now.
Kvothe studied only slightly the Adem arts, and still he is formidable.
That's you.
How much more skilled must they themselves be? However, if you fight and lose, they will think, he only learned a piece of what the Adem know."
It's because the zone is overlapping right here.
The
so,
old
like,
woman's
90% of the
eyes
time, the
twinkled
zone's
ever so
overlapping,
slightly.
it's pulling.
She gestured, amusement. "No matter what, our reputation thrives. This serves Ademre." I nodded, willing acceptance. "It will not hurt my reputation either," I said, understatement. There was a
Yeah.
pause in the conversation, then Cheyenne gestured solemn
Is there any
importance.
site here?
"When we spoke before, you
I
asked
have
me
Fortnite
of
there right
Dorinda,"
through. I
Do
literally
you
looked through
remember?
all of Millet. I swear.
Cheyenne asked. From the corner of my eye, I saw Vashet shift uncomfortably in her seat. Suddenly excited, I nodded. "I have remembered a story of such. Would you like to hear it?" I gestured extreme eager interest. "It is an old story, old as Ademre. It is always told the same. Are you ready to hear it?" Profound formality. There was a hint of ritual in her voice. I nodded again, pleading entreaty. "As with all things, there are rules. I will tell you this story once. After, you may not speak of it. After, you may not ask questions." Cheyenne looked back and forth between Vashet and myself. Grave seriousness.
He's just on the pill.
"Not until you have slept 1,000 nights may you speak on this.
Beach.
Not until you have traveled 1,000 miles may you ask questions. Knowing this, are you willing to hear it?" I nodded a third time,
We don't want to grief
my
our doors,
excitement
though.
rising in me. Cheyenne spoke with great formality. "Once there was a great realm peopled by great people. They were not Ademre. They were what
So,
Ademre
so
was
we pulled back there,
before
we just
we
fell to that
became
building?
ourselves.
Mills normally becomes a shit
But
show.
at this time they were themselves.
I think
The
we got
women
called.
and
They're
men,
on top of
fair
this building.
and
They're
strong.
on top of this building with,
They sang
this festival.
songs of power and fought as well as Ademre do. These people had a great empire. The name of the empire is forgotten. It is not important as the empire has fallen. And since that time, the land has broken and the sky changed. In the empire there were 7 cities and 1 city. The names of the 7 cities are forgotten, for they are fallen to treachery and destroyed by time. The 1 city was destroyed as well, but its name remains.
Oh,
It was
nice.
called Tariniel. The empire had an enemy, as strength must have, But the enemy was not great enough to pull it down. Not by pulling or pushing was the enemy strong enough to drag it down.
Just let me know. I'll give
The
you
enemy's name is remembered, but it will wait.
I'm gonna take the bow again.
Since not by strength could the enemy win, he moved like a worm in fruit.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
The enemy was not of the Lethani.
I'm right
He
here.
poisoned 7 others against the Empire, and they forgot the Lethani.
Vertical clearance.
6 of them betrayed the cities that trusted them. 6 cities fell, and their names are forgotten.
No, I can. It's like
One
completely.
remembered the Lethani,
I can go
and
like
did
on
not
this
betray
side.
a city.
That's what I was just saying.
That city
No,
did
I'm
not
just-
fall.
Guys,
One of them remembered the Lethani, and the Empire was left with hope,
building.
with one unfallen city. But even the name of that city is forgotten, buried in time.
Yes, I do think so.
But 7 names are remembered,
All right,
the
so
name
right
of the
there.
one and of the 6 who follow him. 7 names have been carried through the crumbling of empire, through the broken land and changing sky. 7 names are remembered through
That's
the
why it's
long
better, 'cause
wandering
you
of
it's gonna
Edemre.
pull there, but
7 names have been
then,
remembered,
I
the names of the 7 traders. Remember them and know them by their 7 signs. Cyphus
Maybe
bears
we
the
can walk
blue
across
flame. Sturtius is in thrall of iron. Ferul chill and dark of eye.
He's literally fucking.
Usnia lives in nothing but decay. Grey Dalcenti never speaks. Pale Alenta brings the
This
blight.
team.
Last, there is the Lord of 7.
But
Hated, hopeless, sleepless, sane. Alaxel bears the shadow's
No,
hane.
not when that team's looking. Not when that team's looking. That team's looking. We can't do it.
Chapter 129. Interlude. Din of whispering. Rashi! Bast cried out, his face stricken. No! Stop!
I can't tap.
He held
trade,
out his
so
hands as if he would
I'm
press them
gonna
against
die.
the innkeeper's mouth. You shouldn't say such things!
stupid. Oh Jesus.
Kvothe smiled in a humorless way. Bast, who taught you
I'd
your
be able to
name
walk on the
lore in the
inside
first
of that
place?
fence and then play the
Not
opposite
you,
side of the fence.
Reshi! Bast shook his head. There are things every Fey child knows.
I'm getting shot on my
It's
back. I
never
can't
good
even
to
hold for you.
speak such things aloud. Not ever. And why is that? Kvothe prompted in his best teacher's voice. Because some things can tell when their names are
Even if you
spoken.
die close.
Bast swallowed.
Like now.
They can tell where they're spoken. Kvothe gave a somewhat exasperated sigh. There is small harm in saying a name once, Bast.
They didn't even know that you were there.
He sat back in his chair. Why do you think the Adem have their traditions surrounding that particular story? Only once, and no questions after? Bast's eyes narrowed thoughtfully, and Kvothe gave him a small, tight
I have
smile.
the 3x.
Exactly. Trying to find someone who speaks your name once is like tracking a man through a
Yes, that's right.
forest
I
from
had
a
this
single
before.
footprint. Chronicler spoke up hesitantly, as if afraid of interrupting. Can such a thing really be done? He asked.
Can you take the 1x2 or no?
I
Truthfully?
can't.
Whatever, fine.
Kvothe nodded grimly. I expect that's how they found my troop when I was young. Chronicler looked around nervously, then
Building's
frowned
actually better.
and made an obvious
Yeah,
effort to
this is what I,
stop.
this is what I meant about Prowler.
The result was that he sat very still, looking every bit as nervous as before.
I think we forced their height late.
Does that mean they might come here?
So unclosed.
I-
You've certainly been talking about them enough.
If we stay in this
Kvothe
building,
made a
and we
dismissive
just hold
gesture.
Down the building, this building
No.
is almost impossible to
Names
push
are
because
the
how many
key.
eyes are on it.
Real names. Deep names. And I have been avoiding them for just that reason. My father was a great one for details.
And we just shoot
He had been
like
asking
this side.
questions and digging up old
Thing is,
stories
the thing
about the
is, Mills
Chandrian
is
for
still here.
years.
They can still hold
I
like,
expect
this
he
backside,
stumbled
so we
onto a
can't, like,
few
do
of their
too much.
old names and worked them
They
into
can
his
still chill
song.
there.
Understanding washed over Chronicler's face,
I want to try something.
and then rehearsed it again and again. The innkeeper gave a faint, fond smile.
No, but I'm saying that we,
Endlessly,
like,
if I
late,
knew
we can
him at
force
all.
This team's, like,
I have no
rooftop
doubt
pretty
he and my mother did their solid best to work every tiny burr out of their song
mean-
before they made it public. They were perfectionists.
We just take inside.
He gave a
Yeah,
tired
If they're
sigh.
holding roof 3-man, then we
To
can
the
stay inside, but I
Chandrian,
think
he
that
must
their-
have been
their
like
rooftops
someone
can be enforced.
constantly lighting a signal fire. I expect the only thing that kept them safe for so
I feel like there's
long
no
was that we were
situation where they're gonna
constantly
be able to sit
traveling.
there completely, like,
Bast
uncontested
broke in
the entire
again.
game.
Which is why you shouldn't
Or
say
like
such
their
things,
focus
Reshi.
is-
Kvothe frowned. I have slept my 1,000 nights and traveled several thousand miles since then, Bast. It is safe to say them once. With all the hell that's breaking loose in the world these days, you can believe people are telling old stories more often. If the Chandrian are listening for names, I don't doubt they've got a slow din of whispering from Arua to the Circle C. Bast's expression made it clear he was less than reassured. Besides, Kvothe said with a bit of a weary sigh, it's good to have them written down.
Oh, you fucking...
They may prove
you zeroed
useful
out
to
still?
someone someday. Still, Reshi, you should be more careful. What have I been these last years except for careful, Bast? Kvothe said, his irritation finally bubbling to the surface. What good has it done me?
They have arms.
Besides, if what you say about the Cathay is true, then things will end in tears no matter what I do. Isn't that right? Bast opened his mouth, then closed it, obviously at a
That's
loss.
hella trades.
Then, he darted a look toward Chronicler, his eyes pleading for support. Seeing this, Kvothe turned to look at Chronicler as well, raising an eyebrow curiously. I'm sure I don't know in the least, Chronicler said, looking down as he opened his satchel and brought out an ink-stained piece of cloth. Both of you have seen the full extent of my naming prowess.
All dead.
Iron. And that is a fluke by all accounts. Master Namer declared me an utter waste of his time. That sounds familiar, Kvothe
He
murmured.
has so many armor swaps, too.
Chronicler shrugged. In my case, I took him at his word.
Swinging that, like...
Can you remember the
extremely hard.
excuse he gave you? He had many specific criticisms. I
swung
knew
all
too
three of
many
them.
words. I'd never been hungry. I was too soft. Chronicler's hands were busy cleaning the nib of his pen. I felt he made his overall position clear when he said, "Who would have thought a papery little scriv like you could have any iron in him at all?" Kvothe's mouth quirked into a sympathetic smile. Did he really? Chronicler shrugged. He called me a twat, actually. I was trying not to offend the innocent ears of our young friend here. He nodded at Bast. From what I can tell, he's had a rough day. Kvothe smiled in full now. It's a shame we weren't ever at the university at the same time. Chronicler gave the nib one last rub against the soft cloth and held it up to the fading light from the inn's window. Not really, he said. You wouldn't have liked me. I was a papery little twat, and spoiled, and full of
I
myself.
also should have waited for that arc star.
And what's changed since
I
then?
waited for that arc star.
Kvothe
I
asked.
didn't have any nades, so I wasn't playing.
Chronicler blew air through
If
his
I had
nose
nades.
dismissively. Not much, depending who you ask. But I like to think I've had my eyes
live?
opened a bit.
Bro, I don't know.
He screwed the nib carefully back into his pen. And how did that happen
They
exactly?
did.
Kvothe asked. Chronicler
knocked
looked
and one
across
got
the
put down, one
table,
HP,
seeming
and
surprised
God.
at the question. Exactly? He asked. Telling a story isn't what I'm here for. He tucked the cloth back into his satchel.
I just didn't do enough.
In brief, I had a snit and left the university looking for greener pasture. Best thing I ever did. I learned more from a month on
They
the
should
road
win.
than I had in 3 years of
Unless
classes.
unless the team on top
Kvothe
of us
nodded.
Horizon, they should win.
Tecum said the same
All they
thing.
gotta do is
No
just-
man is brave
do
that has
that
never
for
walked
one.
100 miles. If you want to know the truth of who you are, walk until not a person knows your name. Travel is the great leveler, the great teacher, bitter as medicine, crueler than mirror glass. A long stretch of road will teach you more about yourself than 100 years of quiet introspection. Chapter 130, Wine and Water. Saying my farewells in Hert took an entire day. I shared a meal with Vashette and Tempe, and let both of them give me more advice than I needed or desired. Celian cried a bit and told me she would come visit me when she finally took the red.
So
We bouted one
Horizon
final
won't work.
time, and I suspect she let me win. Lastly, I spent a pleasant evening with Pentha that turned into a pleasant night, and eventually into a pleasant late night. I did manage to catch a few hours of sleep in the pale hours before dawn. I grew up among the Rue, so I am endlessly
Actually, bring more
amazed
down-
how quickly
down
a
more
person
while
can
it's
put
lucky.
down roots in a place. Though I had been in Hert less than 2 months, it was hard to leave.
When did that happen?
Still, it felt good to be back on the road again, heading toward Alvaron and Denna. It was time I collected my reward for a job well done and delivered an earnest and rather belated
The other
apology.
guy was a rat by Mill.
5 days later, I was walking one of those long, lonely stretches of road you only find in the low hills of eastern Vintus. I was, as my father used to say, on the edge of the map. I had only passed 1 or 2 travelers all day, and not a single inn.
Right there.
The thought of sleeping outdoors wasn't particularly troubling, but I had been eating from my pockets for a couple days, and a warm meal would have been a welcome thing.
Then that's kind of bad.
Night had nearly fallen, and I had given up hope of something decent in my stomach when I spotted a line of white smoke trailing into the twilight sky ahead of me. I took it for a farmhouse at first. Then I heard a faint strain of music, and my hopes for a bed and hearth-hot meal began to rise. But as I came around a curve in the road, I found a surprise better than any roadside inn. Through the trees, I saw a tall campfire flickering between 2 achingly familiar wagons. Men and women lounged about, talking. One strummed a lute, while another tapped a small tabor idly against his leg.
We could have just killed them all.
Others were pitching a tent between 2 trees, while an older woman set a tripod over the fire. Troopers.
Last 3 games.
What's better, I recognized familiar markings on the side of one of the wagons. To me, they stood out more brightly than the fire. Those signs meant that these were true troopers. My family, the Adima Rue.
20 points.
As I stepped from the trees, one of the men gave a shout, and before I could draw breath to speak, there were 3 swords pointing at me. The sudden stillness after the music and chatter was more than slightly unnerving.
So our lead doesn't.
A handsome man with a black beard and a silver earring took a slow step forward, never taking the tip of his sword off my eye.
The original fight. I thought that was gonna
"Otto!" he
If we
shouted
could
into the
shoot
woods
to
behind me.
inside, it would have given us a lot
"If you're
more
napping,
information.
I swear on my mother's milk I'll gut you!"
And, yeah.
"Who the hell are
be.
you?"
It's like we're safe in the building. That's
The
where we're
last
at.
was directed at me,
'Cause they
but
just
before I
inst-
could
they just
respond,
insted that
a
shit,
voice
like-
came out of the trees.
Yeah. I don't just.
"I'm right here, Alec. Who's that? How in the God's name did he get past me?" When they'd drawn their swords on me, I'd raised my hands. It's a good habit to have when anyone points something sharp at you. Nevertheless, I was smiling as I spoke. "Sorry to startle you, Alec. Save it," he said coldly. "You have 1 breath left to tell me why you were sneaking around our camp."
Dude, I'm not gonna lie. Kimchi.
I had no need to talk, and instead turned so everyone by the fire could see the loot case slung across my back. The change in Alec's attitude was immediate. He relaxed and sheathed his sword. The others followed suit as he smiled and approached me, laughing. I laughed too. "One family! One family!" He shook my hand and turned toward the fire, shouting, "Best behavior, everyone! We have a guest tonight."
I feel like that doesn't really.
There was a low cheer, and everyone went busily back to whatever they had been doing before I arrived.
Some people like.
A thick-bodied man wearing a sword stomped out of the trees. "I'll be damned if he came past me, Alec. He's from our family," Alec interjected smoothly. "Oh," Otto said, obviously taken aback. He looked at my loot. "Welcome, then." I didn't go past, actually. I lied. When it was dark, my shade made me very difficult to see, but that wasn't his fault, and I didn't want to get him in trouble. I heard the music and circled around. I thought you might be a different troop, and I was going to surprise them.
Like going back and forth.
Otto gave Alec a pointed look, then turned and stomped back into the woods.
Yeah, he's been swapping back and forth and like having.
Alec put his arm around my shoulders. "Might I offer you a drink? A little water, if you can spare it." "No guest drinks water by our fire," he protested. "Only our best wine will touch your lips."
You think so?
"The water of the Adima is sweeter than wine to those who have been upon the road." I smiled at him. "Then have water and wine, each to your desire." He led me to one of the wagons, where there was a water barrel. Following a tradition older than time, I drank a ladle of water and used a second to wash my hands and face. Patting my face dry with the sleeve of my shirt, I looked up at him and smiled. "It's good to be home again." He clapped me on the back. Come,
killed or something.
let me introduce you to the rest of your family.
He's not the best mechanic.
First were two men of about
Yeah, but,
20,
like, do you think
both
Hal
with
would be
scruffy
the best
beards.
player in the game if he swapped the controller?
Fred and Josh are our two best singers, excepting myself, of course. I shook their hands.
Not right
Next
now, at
were the
least.
two men playing
Right
instruments
now-
around the fire.
But like, Hal was
Gaskin plays lute. Laren does pipes and tabor. They smiled at me. Laren struck the head of the tabor with his thumb, and the drum made a
That's
mellow
like-
tum.
I don't know. 6 months.
There's
so he's grown
Tim.
A little bit, but
Alec pointed across the fire to a tall, grim man oiling a sword. And you've already met Otto. They keep us from falling into danger on the road. Tim nodded,
1200 for the
looking
whole
up
team,
briefly
so it'd be
from his
400
sword.
Like,
This is Anne. Alec gestured to an older woman with a pinched expression and gray hair pulled
like
back
the
in a
best
bun.
all-round player, I would definitely
She
say.
keeps us fed
Was
and plays
now.
mother to us
Probably
all.
still is, to be honest.
Anne continued to cut carrots, ignoring both of us. And far from last is our own sweet Kate, who holds the key to all our hearts. Kate had hard eyes and a mouth like a thin line, but her expression softened a little when I kissed her hand. And that's everyone, Alec said with a smile and a little bow. Your name is? Quoth. Welcome, Quoth. Rest yourself and be at your ease.
Hit or miss.
Is there anything we can do for you?
A body
A bit of that
pillow?
wine you mentioned earlier. I smiled. He touched the heel of his hand to his forehead. Of course! Or would you prefer ale? I nodded, and he fetched me a mug.
I mean,
Excellent,
yeah, I mean,
I said after tasting it, seating myself on a convenient stump.
valid to say that
He tipped an imaginary hat.
he's the only one
Thank you.
laying on his
We were lucky enough to nick it on our way through Levenshire a couple days ago. How has the road been treating you of late? I stretched backward and sighed.
saying that
Not bad for a lone minstrel, I shrugged. I take advantage of what opportunities present themselves. I have to be careful since I'm alone.
I also think they're younger too.
Alec nodded wisely.
They're gonna handle it.
The only safety we have is in numbers, he admitted, then nodded to my lute. Would you favor us with a bit of a song while we're waiting for Anne to finish dinner? Certainly, I said, setting down my drink.
I feel like
What would you like to hear?
Luck's changed a lot. I feel
Can
like
you
it's
play
brings
Leave the Town Tinker?
Instead of
Can
it
I?
just kinda shuts off.
You tell me.
He
Who?
just turns that
I
part
lifted my lute from its case and began to play. By the chorus, everyone had stopped what they were doing to listen. I even caught sight of Otto near the edge of the trees as he left his lookout to peer toward the fire. When I was done, everyone applauded enthusiastically.
Yeah, Luck's always
You can play it, Alec laughed. Then his expression became serious, and he tapped a finger to his mouth. How would you like to walk the road with us for a while? He asked after a moment. We could use another player. I took a moment to consider it. Which way are you heading? Easterly, he said. I'm bound for Severn, I said. Alec shrugged. We can make it to Severn, he said, so long as you don't mind taking the long way around. I have been away from the family for a long time, I admitted, looking at the familiar sights around the fire. One is a bad number for an edema on the road, Alec said persuasively, running a finger along the edge of his dark beard.
Luck is
I
great.
sighed.
Oh, okay.
Ask me again in the morning. He slapped my knee, grinning. Good! That means we have all night to convince you. I replaced my lute and excused myself for a call of nature. Coming back, I knelt next to Anne where she sat near the fire. What are you making for us, Mother? I asked. Stew, she said shortly. I smiled. What's in it?
Oh, Saitama?
Anne squinted at me.
I'm fucking beating his...
Lamb, she said, as if daring me to challenge the fact. It's been a long while since I've had lamb, Mother. Could I have a taste? You'll wait, same as everyone else, she said sharply. Not even a small taste? I wheedled, giving her my best ingratiating smile. The old woman drew a breath, then shrugged it away. Fine, she said, but it won't be my fault if your stomach sets to aching. I laughed. No, Mother, it won't be your fault. I reached for the long-handled wooden spoon and drew it out. After blowing on it, I took a bite. Mother, I exclaimed. This is the best thing to touch my lips in a full year. Humph, she said, squinting at me. It's the first truth, Mother, I said earnestly. Anyone who does not enjoy this fine stew is hardly one of the Rue, in my opinion. Anne turned back to stir the pot and shooed me away, but her expression wasn't as sharp as it had been before. After stopping by the keg to refill my mug, I returned to my seat. Gaskin leaned forward. You've given us a song. Is there anything you'd like to hear? How about Piper Wit? I asked. His brow furrowed. I don't recognize that one. It's about a clever Rue who outwits a farmer. Gaskin shook his head. I'm afraid not. I bent to pick up my lute. Let me. It's a song every one of us should know. Pick something else, Laren protested. I'll play you something on the pipes. You've played for us once already tonight. I smiled at him. I forgot you piped. You'll like this one, I assured him. Piper's the hero. Besides, you're feeding my belly. I'll feed your ears. Before they could raise any more objections, I started to play quick and light. They laughed through the whole thing. From the beginning, when Piper kills the farmer, to the end, when he seduces the dead man's wife and daughter.
This is a banger.
I left off the last two verses where the townsfolk kill Piper. Laren wiped his eyes after I was done. Heh, you're right, Quoth. I'm better off knowing that one. Besides, he shot a look at Kate where she sat across the fire. It's an honest song.
Dude,
Women can't keep their hands off a Piper. Kate snorted derisively and rolled her eyes. We talked of small things until Anne announced the stew was done. Everyone fell to, breaking the silence only to compliment Anne on her cooking. Honestly, Anne, Alec asked after his second bowl, did you lift a little pepper back in Levenshire? Anne looked smug. We all need our secrets, dear, she said. Don't press a lady. I asked Alec,
Best EDM drops of all time.
have times been good for you and yours? Oh, certainly, he said between mouthfuls. 3 days ago, Levenshire was especially good to us. He winked. You'll see how good later. I'm glad to hear it. In fact, he leaned forward conspiratorially.
You said what it
We've done so well
I don't read
that
my
I feel
chat during
quite
tourney
generous.
days, my guy.
Generous enough to offer you anything you'd like.
You said what it do, so I
Anything
said
at
what's
all.
up.
Ask and it's yours. He leaned closer and said in a stage whisper, I want you to know this is a blatant attempt to bribe you into staying on with us. We would make a thick purse off that lovely voice of yours.
Oh.
Not to mention the songs he could teach us, Gaskin chimed in. Alec gave a mock snarl. Don't help him bargain, boy. I have the feeling this is going to be hard enough as it is. I gave it a little thought. I suppose I could stay. I let myself trail off uncertainly. Alec gave a knowing smile. But I would ask for 3 things. 3 things. He looked me up and down,
My fucking shots.
just like in one of the stories.
Except for last game, I ran.
It only seems right,
like
I
double
urged.
decade.
He gave a hesitant nod. I suppose it does. And how long would you
I didn't know
travel
that
with
they,
us?
I guess they got the
Until
res
no
off
one objects to
handful
my
on the
leaving.
shop already. We'll
Does
see
anyone
how
have any
long
problem with this?
Yeah, we were a little slow on it.
Alec looked around. What if he asks for one of the wagons? Tim asked. His voice startled me, harsh and rasping like 2 bricks grating together. It won't matter, as he'll be traveling with us,
It's North
Alec
London,
argued.
For sure.
They belong to all of us anyway, and since he can't leave unless we say so... There were no objections. Alec and I shook hands, and there was a small cheer. Kate held up her mug. To Quoth and his songs, she said. I have a feeling he'll be worth whatever he costs us. Everyone drank, and I held up my own glass. I swear on my mother's milk, none of you will ever make a better deal than the one you made with me tonight. This evoked a more enthusiastic cheer, and everyone drank again. Wiping his mouth, Alec looked me in the eye.
Badly,
So,
to be honest.
what is the first thing you want from us? I lowered my head. It's a little thing, really. I don't have a tent of my own, If I'm going to be traveling with my family... Say no more! Alec waved his wooden mug like a king granting a boon. You'll have my own tent, piled with furs and blankets a foot deep. He made a gesture over the fire to where Fran and Josh sat.
Yeah, no.
Go set it up for him.
I have to
That's all right,
though.
I protested. I can manage it myself.
No,
Hush.
dude.
It's good for them.
I was actually
Makes them
about to
feel
have such
useful.
good loot.
Speaking of which... He made another gesture at Tim. Bring them out, would you? Tim stood and pressed a hand to his stomach.
Wiping the floor or something?
I'll do it in a quick minute. I'll be right back. He turned to walk off into the woods. I don't feel very good. That's what you get for eating like you're at a trough, Otto called after him. He turned back to the rest of us. Someday he'll realize he can't eat more than me and not feel sick afterward. Since Tim's busy painting a tree, I'll go get them, Laren said with thinly veiled eagerness. I'm on guard tonight, Otto said. I'll do it. I'll get them, Kate said, exasperated. She stared the other two back into their seats and walked behind the wagon on my left. Josh and Fren came out of the other wagon with a tent, ropes, and stakes.
Guns forever.
Where do you want it? Josh asked. That's not a question you usually have to ask a man, is it, Josh? Fren joked, nudging his friend with an elbow. I tend to snore, I warned them. You'll probably want me a little away from everyone else, I pointed. Over between those two trees would be fine. I mean, with a man, you normally know where they want it, don't you, Josh? Fren continued, as they wandered off and began to string up the tent. Kate returned a minute later, leading a pair of lovely young girls. One had a lean body and face, with straight black hair cut short like a boy's. The other was more generously rounded, with curling golden hair. Both wore hopeless expressions and looked to be about 16. Meet Kryn and Ellie, Kate said, gesturing to the girls. Alec smiled. They are one of the ways in which Lavenshire was generous to us. Tonight, one of them will be keeping you warm. My gift to you as the new member in our family. He made a show of looking them over. Which one would you like? I looked from one to the other.
That's what he said.
That's a hard choice. Let me think on it a little while. Kate sat them near the edge of the fire and put a bowl of stew in each of their
I did,
hands.
But that was because he said
The girl with the golden hair, Ellie,
I was
ate
like, oh, yeah,
woodenly
that's
for a
true.
few bites, then slowed to a stop like a toy winding down.
Because you can grab an RE45.
Her
and an
eyes looked
alternator and
almost
just
blind,
fuck.
as if she were watching something
Even the
none of us
habit,
could
for
see.
anything.
Kryn's eyes, on the other hand, were focused fiercely into the fire. She sat stiffly
Well,
with
that's
her
actually
bowl
pretty
in her
easy.
lap.
But I'm not gonna.
Girls, Alec chided. Don't you know that things will get better as soon as you start cooperating?
Get back to war. Or at least
Ellie took another slow bite, then stopped. Kryn stared into the fire, her back stiff, her expression hard.
Like far range, like recoil
From where she
control
sat by the
movement.
fire, Anne prodded at them with her wooden spoon.
I'm
Eat!
dropping instantly, so.
The response was the same as before. One slow bite, one tense rebellion. Scowling,
So I lose
Anne
here,
leaned
go
closer
here, and then
and
go
gripped
here
the
or
dark-haired
something?
girl
Where do I go?
firmly by the chin, her other hand reaching for the bowl of stew. Don't, I urged. They'll eat when they're hungry enough. Alec looked up at me curiously.
I'm queuing up to
I know what I'm talking about.
having these people land on
Give them something to drink instead. The old woman looked for a moment as if she might continue anyway, then shrugged and let go of Kryn's jaw.
There's a purple.
Fine.
And a
I'm
bat.
sick of force-feeding this one anyway. She's been nothing but trouble. Kate sniffed in agreement.
That's kind of shit. For
Little
you.
bitch came at me when I untied her for her bath, she said, brushing her hair away from the side of her face to reveal scratch marks. Almost took out my damn eye.
These people don't even know you're there.
Did a runner, too, Anne said, still
I was
scowling.
about to say another like.
I've had to start
crazy
doping her
play
at
you
night.
could do is you could hit the high point.
She made a
balloon
disgusted
and probably
gesture.
fly all the way
Let her
down here.
starve if she wants. Laren came back to the fire with 2 mugs, setting them in the girl's unresisting hands. Water? I asked. Ale, he said. It'll be better for them if they aren't eating.
Jesus Christ!
I stifled my protest. Ellie drank in the same vacant manner in which she had eaten.
Fuck.
Kryn moved her eyes from the fire, to the cup, to me. I felt an
Dude, no,
almost
I literally
physical
just saw
shock at her
laser
beams.
beams.
To
What the
Denna.
fuck?
Do they have two toilets?
Still looking at me, she
Breaching
drank.
our doors.
Her hard eyes gave away nothing of what was happening inside her head.
I mean, they're
Bring
not
them
gonna
over to
say
sit
that
by
for
me,
long, right?
I said.
On the roof to see
It
if-
might help me to make up my mind.
One's extending out in the open to the right.
Kate brought them over. Ellie was docile.
My God, it
Kryn
just
was stiff.
loaded as fast as a
Be careful with this
fucking
one,
fucking-
Kate said,
It sounds like you're
nodding to the dark-haired girl.
You're not
She's a
fucking
scratcher.
moving.
Tim came back looking a little pale.
Okay,
He
so
sat by the
one-man
fire where
charge
Otto
rifle
nudged him with an elbow.
Something.
Want some more
That
stew?
hurts.
He asked maliciously.
Me as well.
Sod off, Tim rasped weakly. A little ale might settle your stomach, I advised.
I think they're fatty.
He nodded, seeming eager for anything that might help him.
Stop.
Kate fetched him a fresh mugful. By this time, the girls were sitting on either side of me, facing the fire. Closer, I saw things I had missed before. There was a dark bruise on the back of Kryn's neck.
Doing some damage to
The
them.
blonde girl's wrists were merely chafed from being tied, but Kryn's were raw and scabbed. For all that, they smelled clean. Their hair was brushed, and their clothes had been washed recently.
Yeah.
Kate had been tending to them.
Yeah.
They were also much more lovely up
I mean, I'm
close.
double spray.
I reached out to touch their shoulders.
If I
Kryn
take a trade
flinched
battle, he's
and
probably gonna win
stiffened.
90% of the time.
Ellie didn't react at all.
30-30, so I'm walking.
From off in the direction of the trees, Friend called out,
Yeah.
"It's done! Do you want us to light a lamp for you?" "Yes, please," I called back. I looked from one girl to the other, then to Aleg. I cannot decide between the two,
Keep paying attention.
I told him honestly.
If they think that this is
so I will have both.
like ISO.
Aleg laughed
They
incredulously.
might just take the- they
Then,
might just
seeing
take
I
the
was
stuff.
serious, he
So if
protested.
somebody like decides to
"Oh,
swing
come
at me,
now.
like, no, we can't.
That's hardly
do
fair
that.
to the rest of us. Besides, you can't possibly—"
Listen, they don't have a lot of
I gave him a frank look.
They're not gonna run
Well,
across to fight us and
he
then
hedged.
immediately.
"Even if you can,
How can get it probably a
this
second
is the
right
second thing I ask for,"
time.
I said formally.
Whoa, someone needs to
Both
get
of them.
the roof and then shoot straight down at them.
Otto made a cry of protest that was echoed in the expression of Gaskin and Laren.
On the store, probably.
I smiled reassuringly at them. Only for tonight.
Cracked. 90 on them.
Fran and Josh came back from setting up my tent.
If you have. Okay.
"Be thankful he didn't ask for you, Otto,"
Huge.
I can
Fran
beat it.
said to the big man.
Man. Jumping.
"That's what Josh would have asked for, isn't it, Josh?" "Shut your hole, Fran," Otto said, exasperated.
He's getting just shot.
"Now I feel ill."
Why are you-
I stood and slung my loot over one shoulder. Then I led both lovely girls,
You went back
one
and threw it out.
golden and one dark, toward my tent.
15.
He got out.
Chapter 131, Black by Moonlight. Fran and Josh had done a good job with the tent. It was tall enough to stand in the center, but still crowded with me and both girls
I don't
standing.
have ammo to burn like that, though.
I gave the golden-haired one, Ellie, a gentle push toward the bed of thick blankets. "Sit
Ammo
down,"
count right now.
I said gently.
For the rest of the game.
When she didn't respond, I took her by the shoulders and eased her into a sitting position. She let herself be moved, but her blue eyes were wide and vacant. I checked her head for any signs of a wound.
Team up top.
Not finding any, I guessed she was in deep shock. I took a moment and dug through my travel sack. Then shook some powdered leaf into my traveling cup and added some water from my water skin.
Jesus Christ.
I set the cup into Ellie's
like they're still
hands,
here?
and she took hold of it absently. "Drink it,"
They're not peeking.
I encouraged, trying to capture the tone of voice Valurian had used to gain my thoughtless compliance from time to time. It may have worked, or perhaps she was just thirsty. Whatever the reason, Ellie drained the cup to the bottom.
Thing is going back.
Her eyes still held the same faraway look they had before.
I still like where we're at.
I shook another measure of the powdered leaf into the cup, refilled it with water,
Even if it does
and
go
held
back
it
in the
out for the
cascades, we can always
dark-haired girl
rotate
to
this
drink.
way.
We stayed
can
there
always
for
do what we
several
did that
minutes,
last time,
my
rotate
arm
like command
outstretched,
center side, and then
her
go
arms
south
motionless
slowly
at her
if you have to.
sides. Finally, she blinked, her eyes focusing on me. "What did you give her?"
Hell's setting up here.
she asked.
They're getting Horizon all
"Crushed Velia," I said gently.
here.
"It's a countertoxin."
If you have
There was
potions,
poison in the stew.
crazy.
Her eyes told me she didn't believe me.
Let's anchor the building then.
There's also
I didn't
a
eat any of the stew.
thing here.
Already have.
It was in the ale, too.
Damn,
I saw you drink that.
I'll take.
"Good," she said. "I want to die."
Wait,
I
there's
gave a
guy
deep
on
sigh.
This rock.
"It won't kill you. It'll just make you miserable."
What
You'll throw up and be weak with muscle cramps for a day or
Madness,
two.
I think there's a rat back
I raised
here.
the cup, offering it to her.
It could be the seer.
Why do you care if they kill me?
The guy.
She asked tonelessly.
Here's the thing, I'm down
If
to
they don't
figure
do
out
it now,
what is this
they'll do it
document
later.
law is an issue.
I'd rather die. She
just
clenched
saying, I
her
think there's
teeth
a
before
rat
she
there.
finished the sentence.
Let me see.
They didn't poison you.
Scan behind here.
I poisoned them,
Honestly,
and you happen to get some of it.
wall?
I'm sorry, but this will help you over the worst of it.
Yeah, Luda, come
Crin's gaze wavered for a second, then became iron hard again. She looked at the cup, then fixed her gaze on me.
They're shooting at you
If
guys.
it's harmless,
You guys shooting
you drink it. I can't, I explained. It would put me to sleep, and I have things to do tonight. Crin's eyes darted to the bed of furs laid out on the floor of the tent.
I'm not even chancing this.
I smiled my gentlest, saddest smile.
TL through their game.
Not those sorts of things.
I'm just gonna come right back.
She still didn't move.
Fighting action, pretty sure.
We stood there for a long
I
while.
don't think they can take it.
I heard a muted retching sound from off in the woods.
We didn't loot
I
it.
sighed and lowered the cup,
There was some
looking
sauce,
down.
but no,
I saw Ellie had already curled up and gone to sleep. Her face looked almost peaceful. I took a deep breath and looked back up at Crin.
I know you should be.
You don't have any reason to trust me, I said, looking straight into her eyes. Not after what has happened to you,
You can loot and then go back right now.
but I hope you will.
See it. Oh,
I held out the cup again.
Right here.
She met my eyes without blinking,
I
then
can
reached
grab
for the
his
cup.
gun. I can grab his gun.
She drank it off in one swallow, choked a little, and sat down.
I have a full.
Her eyes stayed hard as marble as she stared at the wall of the tent. I sat down, slightly apart from her.
Flatline is down.
In
Good thing I
15
don't have
minutes,
much ammo
she
for it.
was
I mean, I
asleep.
can take your energy ammo though.
I covered the two of them with a blanket and watched their faces. In sleep, they were even more beautiful than before.
Like heavy fur.
I reached out to brush a strand of hair from
One right
Crin's
here
cheek.
as well.
To my surprise, she opened her eyes and stared at me.
300.
Not the marble stare she had given me before. She looked at me with the dark eyes of a young Denna.
No more on the ground.
I froze with my hand on her cheek. We watched each other for a second. Then her eyes drew closed again. I couldn't tell if it was the drug pulling her under or her own will surrendering to sleep. I settled myself at the entrance of the tent and lay Sasura across my knees. I felt rage like a fire inside me, and the sight of the two sleeping girls was like a wind fanning the coals. I set my teeth and forced myself to think of what had happened here, letting the fire burn fiercely,
Hi.
letting the heat of it fill me.
Think about getting close.
I drew deep breaths, tempering myself for what was to come.
Unless you wanna, I mean,
You're kind of far. Like
I waited for
really far.
3 hours, listening to the sounds of the camp. Muted conversation drifted toward me. Shapes of sentences with no individual words. They faded, mixing with cursing and sounds of people being ill.
like on one of our shits.
I took
I'm
long,
just gonna
slow
actually just have a
breaths
little
as
bit of,
Vachette had shown
a little
me,
bit of presence here.
relaxing my body,
People might-
slowly
Yeah,
counting
people
my
might think that there's a whole
exhalations.
team here.
Vodka from south.
Then,
They're not letting go.
opening my eyes, I looked at the stars and judged the time to be right. I slowly unfolded myself from my sitting position and made a long, slow stretch. There was a solid crescent of moon hanging in the sky,
Two
and
boxes here
everything
that nobody's
seemed
looking
very
at.
bright.
That's what I want. That's what I want.
I approached the campfire slowly.
Need heavy.
It had fallen to sullen coals that did little to light the space between the two wagons. Otto was there, his huge body slumped against one of the wheels. I smelled vomit.
I almost cracked him. I hit him like 90.
"Is that you, Kvoth?" he asked blurrily.
Oh, 1x flatline.
"Yes." I continued my slow
heavy
walk
as
toward
well.
him.
There wasn't any on that guy.
"That bitch Ann didn't let the lamb cook through," he
Also need a
moaned.
sight.
"I swear to holy God, I've never been this sick before." He looked up at me. "Are you all right?" Sasura leapt, caught the moonlight briefly on her blade, and tore his throat.
Madness, no.
He
no
staggered to
bullshit.
one knee, then toppled to his side, his hands
so much
staining
damage.
black as they clutched
I
his
knocked one
neck.
here, Madness.
I left him bleeding darkly in the moonlight, unable to cry out, dying, but not dead.
Okay.
I tossed a piece of brittle iron into the coals of the fire and headed
I just
toward
had,
the
like,
other
3 free
tents.
kills, though.
Laren startled me as I came around the wagon. He made a surprised noise as he saw me walk around the corner with my naked sword. But the poison had made him sluggish, and he had barely managed to raise his hands before Sasura took him in the chest. He choked a scream as he fell backward, writhing on the ground. None of them had been sleeping soundly due to the poison, so Laren's cry set them pouring from the wagons and tents, staggering and looking around wildly. Two indistinct shapes that I knew must be Josh and Fren leapt from the open back of the wagon closest to me. I struck one in the eye before he hit the ground, and tore the belly from the other. Everyone saw, and now there were screams in earnest. Most of them began to run drunkenly into the trees, some falling as they went. But the tall shape of Tim hurled itself at me. The heavy sword he had been sharpening all evening glinted silver in the moonlight. But I was ready. I slid a second long, brittle piece of sword iron into my hand and muttered a binding. Then, just as he came close enough to strike, I snapped the iron sharply between my fingers. His sword shattered with the sound of a broken bell, and the pieces tumbled and disappeared in the dark grass.
I know, but I just need
Tim was more experienced than me, stronger and with longer reach. Even poisoned, and with half a sword, he made a good showing of himself.
We need to watch
It took me nearly half a minute before I snuck past his guard with Lover out the window and severed his hand at the wrist. He fell to his knees, letting out a raspy howl and clutching at the stump. I struck him high in the chest and headed for the trees. The fight hadn't taken long, but every second was vital, as the others were already scattering into the woods. I hurried in the direction I'd seen one of the dark shapes stagger. I was careless, so when Alec threw himself on me from the shadow of a tree, he caught me unaware. He didn't have a sword, only a small knife flashing in the moonlight as he dove for me. But a knife is enough to kill a man. He stabbed me in the stomach as we rolled to the ground. I struck the side of my head against a root and tasted blood. I fought my way to my feet before he did and cut the hamstring on his leg. Then I stabbed him in the stomach and left him cursing on the ground as I went to hunt the others. I held one hand tight across my stomach. I knew the pain would hit me soon, and after that, I might not have long to live. It was a long night, and I will not trouble you with any further details. I found all the rest of them as they made their way through the forest. Anne had broken her leg in her reckless flight, and Tim made it nearly half a mile despite the loss of his hand and the wound in his chest. They shouted and cursed and begged for mercy as I stalked them through the forest, but nothing they said could appease me. It was a terrible night, but I found them all. There was no honor to it, no glory, but there was justice of a sort, and blood, and in the end, I brought their bodies
if they
back.
get big cracks, low-key, I think we just, like, kill one and then come back into the building and play slow. No, just wait, just wait.
I have two nades. I just want to see if it does anything.
Here's an ultra sub, by the way. You get
60
your
on
shield
both.
back. Get your shield back.
Yeah. I hit 60 on 2.
I have one
They're
fruit
getting
nade I
naded.
can throw, and then I might throw a bird nade here and then. Nah, I'm gonna wait. Till zone
You
six.
should wait. Like, if we're not gonna send off like a double 100, like even if there's a double 100, like there's no point in sending.
So start thinking of, is there a way that we can use a horizon ult that's actually going to pull them, or no? Because we can't put it
I
through
don't
the
know
floor
if
here
it
and it
pulls. I
pulls.
think the reverse too.
No, we would just have to queue up and throw it.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'd have to sear out the inside and we'd have to queue and throw it.
Okay, this is your prio.
Wait, they got Gibby ulted.
They might
We can
drop.
do it after this.
Gibby, kill on me.
Coming down.
Gibby's really weak.
Where? Right side.
I'm nading.
Killing that kid.
They had the
Got
bubble.
a nade in their bubble.
What's going on height? Yo, can we low-key bully height?
Yes. I did, like, I cracked almost 2.
Yeah, I know.
That team's still not in on the bottom, by the way.
They seer ulted. They might go
Let's
for a
just
bottom
wait.
floor.
This team's not. Yeah, they actually might.
I'm just staring at the stairs.
Don't let them
Come on, bro.
force our fucking second shit too.
No, I'm staring.
There's a little box that they're probably gonna sit in.
They are not? Where the fuck are they?